Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we are going to start Unit 1 and 2 based on focus on comprehension. This is going to be a lecture for 21st December 2020. So let's start with our lecture. So first we are going to discuss the types of text, the techniques of text reading and genres. This is based on the unit 1 from focus on comprehension. So in this discussion, in this first part of this lecture, we are going to discuss the types of text that are there and then the techniques of identifying the type of text, and then we are going to discuss briefly the genres of the fiction text. Let us first talk about the text types. The term text type is normally used to describe the various kinds of non-fiction text. Now, by the non-fiction text, it is meant that something that is purely a work of a work that is based on facts, something that is not imaginary. So, different text types are there, and we are in the next slide. We are going to discuss a list of the types of texts. So here we have two pictures right in front of you. As you can see that on the left hand side and on the right hand side, both are the types of non-fiction text. I included these two pictures. I have taken them from Google just so because we don't miss out on any kind of non-fiction text. So a list is given in both these pictures and I will read this out to you. Academic paper, that is basically some kind of research paper. Academic publishing, that is also related to the kind of research. Almanac basically is a kind of a book that is based on the facts. Facts means that it is based on the year-wise events that have happened. Now, almanac can be related to the events that have occurred in the world in on a specific date and in specific years. Autobiography, writing the life history of oneself. It means that if I tell you that you have to write an autobiography, so you are going to write about your own life history up till the point that you are writing. Biography is the life, uh, writing about the life of someone else. Blueprint basically is a very rough work or rough sketch of something, and then a book report. If you have read a book, then you can write a report on it, stating the main highlights of a specific book. For example, if I have read a book on science, then I'm going to write in my report what kind of facts are included in the book and what kind of points the book highlights. Creative nonfiction. Creative nonfiction means that when you are not writing something when you are writing something that is not based on an imagination, but still it is creative. So it can be anything. Then a design document, diagram of course is something that illustrates something in the form of a drawing. And then a diary. Now diary is a very interesting thing, type of non-fiction text, because in a diary sometimes we some people are in the habit of writing a diary. By the end of the day, in that diary they normally write the kind of experiences that they have had throughout the day. Then a dictionary, of course, as you all know, that dictionary basically has the meanings of all the words in the alphabetical order, and it also tells us about the uses of the different words in a sentence, how they are used, and the part of speech that they belong to. Non-fiction films, for example, documentaries, the kind of the films or the documentaries that you watch, for example, on the History Channel or on the Discovery Channel. Then encyclopedia basically gives you information about the different things, and it informs the readers about the facts. So, why I explained all these briefly to you, you can read more types of non-fiction in the second book. For example, guides and manuals. Whenever you visit a place, for example, if you will go to Disneyland, then you might get a brochure where it might explain where different rides are located and which sections you can explore, and then also giving you the directions where you should be going. A simple handbook you can be given at the beginning of a seminar, or any you can say any event. Then of course, history. If you are reading a book of history, of course, is not an imaginary story. It is basically based on the facts, the events, the real events that happen in the world. So more types of non-fiction are given here. Why I explained these to you? Because the most common thing among all these is all of these are based on reality. And just to give you an idea that what kind of non-fiction text you can come across. Text types. So the text types are given in your book in the form of a list. Let me open the book, and basically what they have discussed under the heading of the text type is normally the function of the text. I will not say that it is the type of a text. What we have discussed in the previous slide is the type of the text, the non-fiction text that you can come across. And here now we are going to discuss the types of functions that non-fiction text can perform. So the first function that text non-fiction text types can perform is the purpose of recounting. So features of a recount, text that has a recount in it. What is that? A recount text usually has three main sections. The first paragraph gives background information about who, what, where, and when, called an orientation. This is followed by a series of paragraphs that retell the events in the order in which they happened. Some recounts have a concluding paragraph, however, this is not always necessary. अब recounts क्या होते हैं? याददाश्त जिसे हम कहते हैं कि कोई भी इवेंट हुआ हो, कोई भी वाकया हुआ हो, या इवन अगर जो है ना कोई रियल में ज़रूरी नहीं है कोई वाकया हुआ हो, समथिंग वेरी ऑर्डिनरी, लेकिन आप उसे उसी सीक्वेंस में लिख रहे हैं जिस सीक्वेंस में वो हुआ है, यानी कि उसकी बिगिनिंग प्रॉपर से लेकर उसके एंडिंग तक अगर किसी इवेंट के बारे में है, आपने किसी इवेंट के बारे में बताना है, तो फिर आप उसको शुरू से लेके एंड तक एज इट इज लिखेंगे. So, recounts usually include the following grammatical features. Now, इससे पहले मैं आपको बताऊं, for example, if you go to a concert or some kind of seminar, and if your teacher asks you to write a report, so report basically एक तरह का recount ही होता है. उसके अंदर आप बताते हैं कि कोई इवेंट शुरू से लेकर एंड तक कैसे हुआ. तो इसके ग्रामेटिकल फीचर्स क्या होते हैं, यानी कि व्हाट काइंड ऑफ ग्रामेटिकल फीचर्स डज अ रिकाउंट ऑब्जर्व? Proper nouns to identify those involved in the text. Now, a recount can also be basically the minutes of meeting. Minutes of meeting means that if a meeting is happening, then how the meeting started, what kind of contributions did the participants of the meeting make. So these are the things that are related to recounting. Descriptive words to give details about who, what, when, where, and how. So these are the elements that are also included in a report. If you are writing a report, then of course you are recounting. So recounting means remembering. So report is also a non-fiction uh, text type. and you tell who did the action and what kind of action occurred and what was the time when. So when is related to the day, the time, and the place where and how and who did what. The use of the past tense to retell the event. So event has already occurred. Recount का मतलब याद करना है, तो उसका मतलब यही है कि जो इवेंट हुआ है वो पास्ट में होकर ख़त्म हो चुका है, इसीलिए आप उसे पास्ट टेंस में लिखेंगे. Words that show the order of the event. For example, first, next, then. So this is quite important. Even when you are writing a report, तो वो आप एक event की अगर report लिख रहे हैं तो आपको उसी सीक्वेंस में फॉलो करना है उस इवेंट को. अब सीक्वेंस की आइडेंटिफिकेशन के लिए कि कौन सी चीज़ पहले हुई बाद में, so you can use these connectives. These are known as connectives. Words such as first, सेकेंड, थर्ड, फर्स्टली, सेकेंडली, thirdly, ये सब कनेक्टिव्स हैं. तो कनेक्टिव्स आप इसलिए यूज करते हैं ताकि आप बता सकें कि किस ऑर्डर में एक्शन हुआ है. The next type of text that you can come across, or the next type of purpose of text. मैं बार बार ये बात कर रही हूँ कि अभी जो हम रिकाउंट और अभी ये जो हम इंफॉर्मेशन रिपोर्ट का डिस्कस करेंगे, ये सब टेक्स्ट के पर्पसेस हैं. डिफरेंट टेक्स्ट डिफरेंट पर्पस को फुलफिल करते हैं. सो जो पहले हमने डिस्कस किया था, द नॉन फिक्शन, दे आर बेसिकली द टाइप्स ऑफ टेक्स्ट. उन टेक्स्ट के डिफरेंट फंक्शंस होते हैं जो कि वो परफॉर्म करते हैं. सो अमंग दोज फंक्शंस इज द इंफॉर्मेशन रिपोर्ट. What is an information report? An information report is a piece of text that presents information about a subject. ये वही रिपोर्ट है जिसकी मैं थोड़ी देर पहले आपसे बात कर रही थी. Its purpose is to classify and or describe using facts about the subject's parts, behavior, and qualities. The subject is usually general rather than particular. For example, skin rather than an individual person's skin. Examples of information report texts include lectures, reference articles, research assignments, chapters in textbook. तो ये जो lectures हैं, जैसे for example you are taking a lecture right now, so this lecture is giving you some kind of information. So that is why this whole lecture will be considered as informative. Then even the reference articles, if you are going to read any kind of article from a journal, from a periodical, from a newspaper, still the function that it is performing is that of information. Even this lecture that you are taking right now is performing the function of information. Then research assignments. For example, I happen to give you an assignment and I give you such a topic that you will have to sit for 1 to 2 hours and surf over the internet and find out the information related to that specific topic. So that the purpose of that assignment will be that you be able to gather information. Chapters in textbook. So, for example, you have grabbed any textbook and you have started reading it. So, what is the purpose of that book? The purpose of the book is to give you an information. So, that is uh, also one of the functions that non-fiction texts perform. Some texts perform the function of explanation. Now, what is an explanation? An explanation tells how or why something occurs. Explanations can be spoken or written, and their purpose is to tell each step of the process, the how, and to give reasons, the why for it. Examples of explanations texts include how something occurs, why something happened, why things are alike or different, how to solve a problem. सो अगर आपके सामने कोई भी प्रोसेस आता है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल फूड साइकिल, द मोस्ट कॉमन एग्जाम्पल इज द फूड साइकिल. एज साइंस स्टूडेंट्स, या फिर अगर आप साइंस स्टूडेंट्स नहीं भी हैं तो स्कूल में अगर आपको याद हो कि हमने वाटर साइकिल या फूड साइकिल हमने पढ़ा था, जिसके अंदर बताया जाता था कि वाटर साइकिल कैसे होता है. बादलों से पानी जो है वो नीचे आता है, ठीक है। फिर उसके बाद वो पानी जो है ना हमारी ज़मीन अब्जॉर्ब करती है। ज़मीन अब्जॉर्ब करने के बाद कुछ पानी जो है ना अब्जॉर्ब कर लेती है, जो नहीं कर पाती वो समंदरों में, दरियाओं में, नदियों में चला जाता है। नदियों से बहकर वो दरिया में जाता है, दरिया से बहकर वो समंदर में जाता है। ठीक है, फिर उसके बाद वहां से ओशन में चला जाता है, देन इट गेट्स इवेपोरेटेड, इवेपोरेट होकर देन इट टेक्स द शेप ऑफ अ क्लाउड। सो बेसिकली ये आपको एक्सप्लेनेशन दे रहा है कि कैसे कोई चीज होती है, और फिर उसी में रीजन में भी आपको बता दिया जाता है व्हाई इट इज हैपनिंग। नाउ दिस कैन बी आल्सो रिलेटेड टू द फंक्शन ऑफ एन इंजन, हाउ एन इंजन परफॉर्म्स। ठीक है, तो डिफरेंट फंक्शंस जो हैं वो परफॉर्म करने की उस सारी डिस्क्रिप्शन को एक्सप्लेनेशन कहते हैं। सो ये जो वाटर साइकिल का एग्जांपल आपको दिया है, द पर्पस of the illustration and the picture, basically the purpose of that is to give you an explanation regarding the water cycle. So let's review this type of text, that is an explanatory text. Explanation texts tell how something works. They are used in all the arts and sciences. Explanations have five parts to their frameworks. So first let's discuss the five parts of an explanatory text. Title. Now explanation always has a title. This is a short statement about the topic. On your right you can see that let me give you get my laser pointer. Now on your right you can see how is food digested. So this is the step one, this is the first part, and it gives you the title of this text with an explanation. Now this whole, the purpose of this whole text is to give you an explanation. Alright, so the title of it is How is Food Digested? Then the second step is definition of the thing or process. So they will give you a definition of this topic that they have given here. The food we eat is broken down and used by our bodies. This breaking down of food is called digestion. So they have given you a definition of the digestion. So this is the part of the explanation. ये टेक्स्ट जो है ना फंक्शन परफॉर्म कर रहा है एक्सप्लेनेशन का, आपको एक्सप्लेन कर रहा है, आपको बता रहा है कि डेफिनेशन क्या है. Now the third step is to give a description of the parts or elements in the process. You may have heard your stomach, you may have heard your stomach gurgling after you have eaten. The stomach, teeth, tongue and intestines all help to digest food. तो ये आपको थोड़ी डिस्क्रिप्शन भी दे रहे हैं, ये भी एक्सप्लेनेशन का ही पार्ट है, और पूरे टेक्स्ट का मकसद ही एक्सप्लेनेशन का पर्पस जो है वो फंक्शन जो है वो फुलफिल करना है. गर्गलिंग यानी कि गुड़गुड़ होना आपके पेट के अंदर. Okay, now the fourth part is the process, how the thing or process works. When you chew your food, digestion begins. The food is pushed by the tongue to the trapdoor at the back of the throat called the esophagus. It then moves to the stomach where digestive juices make it smaller. In the small intestine, the goodness is soaked up. Finally, water is taken out in the large intestines. और 5 उसकी एप्लीकेशन आपको बता दी ऑफ द ऑब्जेक्ट मशीन और प्रोसेस. द गुडनेस दैट इज लेफ्ट कैन नाउ बी कैरीड अराउंड द बॉडी बाय द ब्लड टू बी यूज्ड फॉर एनर्जी रिपेयर एंड ग्रोथ. तो ये पूरा जो टेक्स्ट आपके सामने एग्जाम्पल के लिए मैंने दिया है, ये एक्सप्लेनेटरी जो फंक्शन है टेक्स्ट का उसको परफॉर्म कर रहा है, और एग्जाम्पल आपका इसीलिए यहाँ मौजूद है. One more function that some text can perform is that to explain the kind of procedure or the instruction or the direction. ये जो instruction का point है, ये आपकी book में भी दिया हुआ है. तो कुछ टेक्स्ट जो हैं वो प्रोसीजर का फंक्शन जो है वो परफॉर्म करते हैं. नाउ व्हाट इज अ प्रोसीजर? A procedure is a piece of text that tells how to do something. Its purpose is to provide instructions for making something, doing something, or getting somewhere. For example, recipes. Now, recipe is the most common example. All of you are familiar with the recipes. Basically, the first section is first step is the title of the recipe. The second step are the kind of ingredients that you would need to make that recipe. And the third step would be the method, the kind of method that you will use to make that recipe. Itineraries. Itineraries is basically the kind of route that you are given when you have to start your journey. Normally, when you get a plane ticket or when you plan a tour, you are given an itinerary. आइटिनरी का मतलब आपके सफ़र का पूरा प्लान है कि आपने स्टार्ट कहाँ से लेना है, आगे से आपने ए डेस्टिनेशन से स्टार्ट लेना है, फिर बी पर जाना है, वहाँ कितना टाइम आपने गुजारना है, बी से सी से डी एंड देन बैक टू ए. Instruction manuals, you can most often see them with the mobile phones that you buy or the television that you buy. आपको instruction दी जाती है how to turn on that TV. फिर आजकल जो smart TVs हैं उनकी operationing आपको बता दी जाती है. Directions. The most common example of the direction that I would give to you is the Google Maps. When you turn on the Google Maps, then the voice instruction or even not the voice instruction, जो आपका मैप आ रहा होता है, it is giving you a direction. तो ये तमाम जो examples हैं ये एक function perform कर रहे हैं procedure का कि कैसे आपको एक जगह से दूसरी जगह step wise आपको कोई काम करना है. Okay, so writing a procedure. So the purpose is to explain how to do something, to explain how to get somewhere when a set of rules needs to be understood. So basically यहाँ पर आपको बताया कि अगर आपने कोई जो है वो procedural text कोई लिखना है तो वो क्या होना चाहिए. When to use a procedural text, writing instructions for a game or process, writing a recipe for a meal, recording a scientific investigation, creating rules for something, giving a set of directions. Remember to keep your instructions short, simple and to the point. अब आप खुद भी देखें, even if you happen to read some kind of procedural text या instructive आप text कोई पढ़ते हैं तो आपको वो instructions अच्छी लगें या नहीं लगती हैं, it depends. If they are given in the very straightforward manner, लंबी घुमा फिरा के बात नहीं की जाती है, then you happen to like those instructions or that procedure. लेकिन अगर घुमा फिरा के बात की जाती है then it becomes a problem for you. So procedural texts are always written in present tense. ये आपके लिए एक hint है. If you happen to come across a text जिसका आपको पता ना चल रहा हो तो उसमें tense की तरफ ध्यान जरूर दें. Procedural text normally जो instructions हैं चाहे वो recipe के हों or happen to be about the kind of directions that you need to reach some place, then they should always be in the present tense. Procedures are presented from the second or third person perspective. Okay, so parts of a procedural text are the title, of course, like I told you, like I gave you the example about a recipe. Example that has been given here is how to make a banana and fudge sundae. Materials or ingredients. What will we need to complete this activity? Be specific, especially if you are writing a recipe. Use points or numbers. Include any special utensils or tools. Then series of steps. In order list what needs to happen to complete your goal. अब यही होता है रेसिपी के अंदर that you have to basically start from the very first step, very basic step, how to pour something in and how to do the mixing and what kind of spices to use. So the materials that are listed in the materials or ingredients section, then the series of steps tells you how to mix them and in what order you should be mixing them. Then the conclusion. The conclusion is a short statement that may offer some specific tips or advice. So basically, this slide tells you what is the structure of a procedural text. ये वैसे काफी आसान सा होता है. अगर आपके सामने कभी कोई ऐसा टेक्स्ट आ जाए तो आपके लिए पहचानना बहुत इजी होगा. So this slide tells you more about the procedural text, the kind of text, for example, how to build a sand castle, how to make a bird habitat, how to plant a sunflower, how to make slime, how to make chocolate coated strawberries, how to make a jack-o'-lantern. So these are the different things, some of the things that you have to construct. कुछ ग्रोथ से रिलेटेड है, हाउ टू प्लांट अ सनफ्लावर, तो ये मुख्तलिफ एग्जाम्पल्स हैं। तो ये तमाम जो एग्जाम्पल्स हैं, इनका मकसद यही है आपको बताना कि प्रोसीजरल जो टेक्स्ट हैं उनका फंक्शन क्या होता है, इंफॉर्मेशन देना होता है, ये नॉन फिक्शन टेक्स्ट की कैटेगरी में होते हैं। इनका फंक्शन क्या होता है, आपको किसी चीज़ का प्रोसीजर बताना, आपको बताना कि कोई चीज़ कैसे बनाई जा सकती है, हाउ समथिंग कैन बी कुक्ड, हाउ समथिंग कैन बी कंस्ट्रक्टेड, और हाउ समथिंग कैन बी ग्रोन. I will pause for 10 seconds so that you can have a look at the slide, or you can pause this video and then you can take a look at the slide. One more type of functions that different texts can perform is to persuade you. Persuade means to convince you about something. So sometimes we come across certain non-fiction texts that sometimes when you read these texts, you get persuaded or you do not get persuaded. So persuasion ke liye you can come across some essays, newspaper articles, even you can take the advertisements as the example. Basically, advertisements are also the form of the persuasive pieces of writing. So, what is the purpose of persuasive writing? To argue the case for a point of view, to convince the reader. So, basically, they are used to convince. कोई भी चीज़ हो सकती है. It can be persuasive essay, it can be an advertisement, it can be some newspaper article, it can be a report, it can be a scientific paper. So इन सब का मकसद जो है वो क्या होता है, to persuade, to convince the reader regarding something. What is the structure of it? Of course, every piece of writing that you come across will always have an introduction. What is the writing about and what is your opinion? So, persuasive writing, whatever text that you come across, that the purpose of which is to persuade, you will always see that their beginning is quite straightforward. It is quite clearly mentioned in the very beginning what the purpose of the text is or why the text is being written. And then in a persuasive writing, you always come across the arguments to support the opinion. It can, if you are writing a persuasive essay, then of course you will have to give the arguments to support your opinion. And if you will come across a persuasive text, then you will always come across the arguments to support the opinion of the writer. And then, of course, you will always have to conclude something properly. If you are writing a persuasive essay, or if you are writing a persuasive advertisement, or any kind of report, or if you will come across such a text, the purpose of which will be to persuade you, you will always see that it will always have a conclusion. So, conclusion always repeats the point of view of the writer. So, this should be the hint for you that for example in if you come across a text and you are a bit confused that what is the purpose of this text, then you can always read the ending or the concluding paragraph of it. It might reiterate means to repeat, so it might reiterate the point which the writer tried to make at the very beginning of that piece of writing. Language features. So, the kind of language that is used in the persuasive writing is it is usually written in the present tense. It includes logical connectives to link ideas. Therefore, however, persuasive writing में आप cause and effect बहुत देखेंगे. The writer might give you a fact or an information and will try to prove it through an example. यूज इमोटिव लैंग्वेज, बहुत ज़्यादा इमोशनल और पावरफुल किस्म के ज़ोरदार किस्म के अल्फाज इस्तेमाल हुए होंगे, जिसे हम कहते हैं धुआंधार किस्म के। सो इमोशंस को बहुत ज़्यादा जो है वो अपील करने के लिए होती है persuasive writing. Ask rhetorical questions. So by the rhetorical questions it is meant, normally हम सवाल पूछते हैं, for example, where is Jim? If I ask where is Jim, so I want to know where Jim actually is. And then rhetorical question, the purpose of this question is not to actually ask for information, but to give you a food for thought, but to make you think about something. Dare the reader to disagree. Now, in the persuasive piece of writing, you will always come across some kind of arguments that will make you question your own ideas. And then even the writer will openly question the mentality of the ordinary people. Counter arguments from the other point of view. So the writer will give you the two sides of the story. The writer will give you the arguments that will be counter to each other. Try and use some facts as well as opinions. So persuasive writing अगर आप खुद लिख रहे हैं तो उसके अंदर facts के साथ साथ आप अपना opinion भी दें. Persuasive writing basically factual ही होती है. If you want to convince someone, then you first have to present the facts. So आप अगर कोई ऐसा text आपको नजर आ जाए persuasive है, तो वहां पर आप देखेंगे कि पहले वो आपको फैक्ट देगा और फिर उस फैक्ट को वो प्रूव भी करेगा. देयरफॉर, हाउएवर, नेवरदलेस, इस तरह के वर्ड्स यूज करके, और साथ वो अपना ओपिनियन अगर देगा, अगर वो अपना ओपिनियन देगा राइटर, तो वो हमेशा उसके साथ कोई फैक्ट भी देगा. Here we have an example of a persuasive text. We have already discussed that the purpose of persuasive text is to convince the reader or listener to agree with a particular viewpoint. Examples of persuasive text include advertisements or debates. So debates आप बहुत frequently देखते रहते हैं, और debates में आप देखते हैं कि बड़ी emotional language use होती है. In the debates, very strong opinions are used, very strong facts are used, very strong words are used. So, persuasive texts use present tense, high modality, emotive language, rhetorical questions, connecting words and phrases. So, here they have given you an analysis of an persuasive text. Let's read it. First, number one is the title, Stop Polluting the Ocean. Now, here, look at the title. The title is quite forceful. It is actually an imperative. आपको कमांड दी जा रही है और आपको कहा जा रहा है स्टॉप पोल्यूटिंग द ओशन. इट फील्स लाइक एज इफ समवन इज गिविंग यू अ कमांड. सो ये काफी फोर्सफुल तरीके से आपके सामने आता है. Okay, now the opening statement. How would you feel if there were plastic bottles, disposed chemicals, ripped fishing nets, and other discarded containers strewn all around your house? Question mark. Now this is a rhetorical question. आपसे फील करके पूछा जा रहा है, आपको कहा जा रहा है आप कैसा फील करेंगे. इससे राइटर जो है, द राइटर इज ट्राइंग टू डेवलप अ कनेक्शन विद द रीडर एज वेल बाय डायरेक्टली आस्किंग अ क्वेश्चन. And this is a rhetorical question. Basically, it is a food for thought. It will make you think about the ocean pollution. And then, sadly, for a vast majority of marine life around the world, these conditions have become commonplace. Now, the connecting word is there, sadly. Our oceans are suffering terribly. Suffering terribly. Now, suffering and terribly, both of these are quite strong words, and these are emotive words. It is therefore vital that humans stop the destruction of our precious oceans with these careless and irresponsible acts of pollution. Now, in the second paragraph, argument. Many people believe that they are powerless. They are not. Now, here, look at this whole sentence. They are not. The writer is clearly expressing his or her opinion that the people are not powerless. And then, again, present tense is used here. It is highlighted in the pink. There are many things we can do in everyday lives to help reduce this environmental disaster. Drink water from the tap instead of from plastic bottles. Take reusable shopping bags to the supermarket instead of using plastic ones. Reduce the amount of garbage you produce. Don't waste unnecessarily. If you see rubbish while you are outdoors, pick it up and dispose of it responsibly. Now, you can see that the arguments are given here, and they are given in very simple but very clear sentences, and the writer has simply stated the facts here. Now, these are such facts that cannot be denied. They have been universally acknowledged as well. Let's look at the concluding statement. Ocean pollution is everyone's problem. We must work. Now, must, the usage of the modality must, is basically reiterating the point of the writer, and secondly, urging the reader just to do something. So, the purpose of the persuasive text is to urge the reader and to convince the reader of the point of view of the writer. We must work together to protect our oceans and save these precious environments for future generations. Must means karna hi hoga. So karna hi hoga is expresses a sense of urgency कि ऐसा करने की जरूरत है, इसके बगैर और कोई चारा ही नहीं है. Argumentative writing. This text type refers to writing which addresses an issue or question and argues for or against a position. In argumentative writing, we use language to inform, to express our reactions and feelings, and to convince the reader that our views are sound and correct. Counter arguments bring in a clincher. Interactive sentence forms like the interrogative and the imperative. So argumentative writing का मकसद ये होता है sort of एक argument develop करना, इसके अंदर खुद ही जो है किसी issue को address करना, उसको question करना और उसके against या उसकी position उसकी favor में जो है वो argument develop करना. So argumentative piece of writing you can very well see in the newspaper articles or in the essays as well. और ये नॉन फिक्शन ज़्यादातर आपको उसमें नज़र आता है टेक्स्ट टाइप में. सो इसका मकसद होता है एक तरह का आर्ग्यूमेंट ही डेवलप कर देना. There is a very thin line, but there is a difference between persuasive writing and the argumentative writing. There are subtle but very significant differences between persuasive writing and the argumentative writing. The goal of persuasive writing is to get reader to agree with you, your point of view on a particular topic. And the goal of argumentative writing is to get reader to acknowledge that your side is valid and deserves consideration as another point of view. A persuasive writing may you try to convince the reader of your point of view, whereas in argumentative writing you leave the room or the space for the reader to decide on his or her own. Basically, in argumentative writing, you give both sides of the picture and both sides of the story. दोनों आप arguments जो उसके favor और against में होते हैं, you develop that argument in a very convincing way. But by the end of it, you basically leave it to the reader to decide on his or her own कि उसका अपना opinion क्या है. General technique of persuasive writing blends facts and emotion in attempt to convince the reader that the writer is right. Often relies heavily on opinion. Persuasive writing में writer का अपना opinion बहुत strongly सामने आता है. So the general technique of argumentative writing is offers the reader relevant reasons, credible facts, and sufficient evidence to honor the writer as a valid and worthy perspective. So इसके अंदर ज़्यादातर थोड़ा सा फॉर्मल आ जाता है कि जो राइटर है वो आपको आर्ग्यूमेंट भी दे रहा है, रीज़न भी दे रहा है, फैक्ट्स भी दे रहा है, लेकिन इमोशनल लैंग्वेज वो बहुत ज़्यादा यूज़ नहीं करता है. Why? Because the writer wants to give enough respect to the reader to have his or her own opinion. Starting point of persuasive writing is to identify a topic and your side. Normally, persuasive writing may you choose your side and you stick to it. In an argumentative writing, you research a topic and then align with one side. आप एक argument develop करते हैं, पहले कहते हैं A है तो B है, B है तो C भी है, लेकिन फिर उसके बाद end पर after developing that argument you finally reach a point. Whereas in persuasive writing शुरू से आपका opinion एक ही होता है और आप different arguments or facts present करते हैं just to make the reader agree to it. Viewpoint in persuasive writing is persuasion has a single minded goal. It is based on a personal conviction that a particular way of thinking is the only sensible way to think. Writer presents one side, his side. So, persuasive writing may include one opposing point. It is then quickly dismissed or refuted. So, अगर writer जो है वो opposing point of view present कर भी रहा है persuasive writing में, तो वो खुद ही उसको रिजेक्ट भी कर देता है. Whereas in argumentative writing, what it does, acknowledge that opposing views exist, not only to hint at what a fair-minded person you are, but to give you the opportunity to counter these views tactfully in order to show why you feel that your own view is the more worthy one to hold. Writer presents multiple perspectives, although is clearly for one side. So in argumentative writing, the writer basically does more of a justice to the equal and opposing point of views. वो equal space देता है writer argumentative writing में, equally जगह देता है और दोनों सारे opinions को equal worth देता है. But by the end of it reaches a valid point. Audience of persuasive writing needs intended audience, knowing what they think and currently believe. The writer attacks, attempting to persuade them to his side. So basically, in persuasive writing, the writer questions the ideology, the thinking, the belief of the intended audience. And in case of argumentative writing, doesn't need an audience to convince. The writer is content with simply putting it out there. So persuasion का जो टारगेट होता है वो कन्विंस करना होता है कि हर सूरत लिखने वाले के साथ पढ़ने वाला कन्विंस हो जाए. लेकिन आर्ग्यूमेंटेटिव राइटिंग में like I said before that it leaves a room for forming an own personal opinion. The attitude of persuasive writing. Persuasive writers want to gain another vote, so they go after readers more aggressively. Persuasive writing is more personal, more passionate, more emotional. And in case of argumentative writing, simply to get the reader to consider you have an idea worthy of listening to. The writer is sharing a conviction whether the audience ends up agreeing or not. So ये point मैं repeat करती नहीं हूँ. I don't think that I need to repeat it once more. After discussing the text types, we are going to discuss what is a genre. So please pay attention to the pronunciation of this word. इसको गलत pronounce नहीं करना. It is genre. It is not genre. उर्दू में या जैसे होता है उसको थोड़ा सा soft कर लें. Genre. Genre definition. Genre means the type of art, literature, or music characterized by a specific form, content, and style. For example, literature has four main genres: poetry, drama, fiction, and non-fiction. So, non-fiction we have already discussed. Fiction, of course, is the work of imagination. Drama can be inspired from the real events, but then again, वो भी fiction का ही एक हिस्सा होता है. And poetry, of course, ये आपका नॉन प्रोज होता है और पोएटिकल फॉर्म होता है. इट इज अ वर्क ऑफ इमेजिनेशन एज वेल. Genre overview. In case of fiction, we have fantasy, realistic fiction, mystery, traditional literature, historical fiction, and science fiction. What is a fantasy? A story including elements that are impossible, such as talking animals or magical powers. Make believe is what this genre is all about. So, the movie that you had, the Shrek or the Donkey King, इस तरह की जो movies हैं, इसके अंदर से आपको एग्जाम्पल मिलता है दैट इट इज़ अ फैंटेसी. इन केस ऑफ अ बुक, एनिमल फार्म इज द मोस्ट एप्ट एग्जाम्पल. जॉर्ज ऑरवेल का लिखा हुआ है. इन दैट book, talking animals are shown. Realistic fiction, a story using made up characters that could happen in real life. So inspired from the real life, किसी भी किस्म की story जो है वो दिखा देते हैं. For example, the dramas and the movies. Mystery, a suspenseful story about a puzzling event that is not solved until the end of the story. Now, the mystery can be a murder mystery, or it can be a thriller, it can be any kind of mystery. It can be a book or a movie. Sherlock Holmes movie or the Sherlock Holmes book. Traditional literature, stories that are passed down from one group to another in history. This includes folk tales, legends, fables, fairy tales, tall tales, uh, and myths from different cultures. सो इसके अंदर आपकी ये लोक दास्तानें भी आ जाती हैं, जैसे हीर रांझा की और इस तरह की. बाकी fables and fairy tales, Cinderella and then Snow White. So these are the examples of the traditional literature. Historical fiction, a fictional story that takes place in a particular time period in the past. Often the setting is real, but the characters are made up from the author's imagination. For here, I would like to give you the example of the Game of Thrones. Science fiction, a type of fantasy that uses science and technology, robots, time machines. So, science fiction stories, we come across a lot of them in the movies. For example, the Captain America, the Avengers series. So, these are all the examples of science fiction. Then non-fiction, we have already discussed this, so I don't think that I need to discuss this further. I will simply read it out to you. Informational, texts that provide facts about a variety of topics: sports, animal science, history, careers, travel, geography, space, weather, etc. Biography, the story of a real person's life written by another person. This I already explained to you in the very first slides. Autobiography, the story of a real person's life that is written by that person. Then the other genre has poetry. Poetry is verse written to create a response of thought and feeling from the reader. It often uses rhythm and rhyme to help convey its meaning. So म्यूजिक के अंदर भी आपको पोइट्री नजर आती है. Now we are going to discuss the tape technique. Now this technique will be required when you will come across a text for reading. So this technique is quite useful. It is there in your book and it is quite handy to analyze or to find out the genre or the type of text that you will come across. You need to follow these steps to identify a text. Text type. First find out what kind of text that you have come across. Determine the text type and genre. So we have discussed text type and genre. तो ये सारे पॉइंट्स अपने जहन में रख के अगर आपको कोई अनसीन या आप कोई भी बुक पढ़े हैं या आपको एनालिसिस के लिए कोई भी चीज़ सामने आ रही है तो आप उसको देखकर अंदाज़ा लगाने की कोशिश करें if it is fiction or if it is non-fiction, and if it is non-fiction, so what is the purpose of it? Is it persuasive? Is it argumentative? Is it informational? Is it instructional? Is it a recount? तो ये आपने टेक्स्ट टाइप सबसे पहले आपने अंदाज़ा लगाना है. Then pay attention to the audience. Determine the target audience of the text or the intended readership of the text. So whenever you come across a text, try to find out ये किस तरह की audience के लिए है, बच्चों के लिए है, बड़ों के लिए है, what kind of age group is it intended for, and what kind of audience is it intended for? Is it intended for the students of science or the students of arts, or for the general public, or for the kids? So this is also the second step to find out the kind of text. Then the third step is the purpose. Determine the purpose of the text. Does the text mean to make you imagine, explore and entertain? क्या टेक्स्ट के अंदर इमेजिनेशन, एक्सप्लोरेशन, एंटरटेनमेंट काफ़ी ज़्यादा है? क्या इंफॉर्मेशन है, एक्सप्लेनेशन है, डिस्क्राइब कर रहा है किसी चीज़ को, आपको इन्फॉर्म भी कर रहा है, साथ आपको बता भी रहा है, एक्सप्लेन भी कर रहा है कि कोई चीज़ कैसे है, परsuade कर रहा है, आर्ग्यू कर रहा है, एडवाइस कर रहा है, एनालाइज कर रहा है, रिव्यू कर रहा है, कमेंट कर रहा है। सो ये पर्पस जो है ये भी फिर आपको आपके नेक्स्ट स्टेप की तरफ ले जाएगा। सो यू हैव टू फॉलो दी स्टेप्स in the same sequence to find out the type of text that you will come across. Then the kind of effect the text will have on the reader. Is it having an emotional effect or is it having a rational effect? क्या आपको बहुत ज़्यादा ये टेक्स्ट जज्बाती कर रहा है या आपको किसी चीज़ के बारे में सोचने पर मजबूर कर रहा है? तो वो रैशनल टेक्स्ट होगा। Now we are done with the unit 1. In unit 2, we are going to discuss the types of sentences and subordinate clauses. There are two types of clauses. First is the main or independent clause, the part of the sentence that can stand alone as its own sentence. Second is the subordinate or the dependent clause, the part of the sentence that cannot stand alone as its own sentence. Divers often wear wetsuits. अगर आप blue वाले part को निकाल दें, even if you happen to read this whole green part on its own, divers often wear wetsuits. It is conveying a complete sense to you. It means that this is the independent clause, and this is also known as a very simple sentence. The part which is in blue, which are examples of basic diving equipment. If you omit the green part here, and if you simply read which are examples of basic diving equipment, it does not make any sense on its own completely. It is basically conveying a very incomplete sense. So this is adding to the meaning of the sentence in the green, but it cannot stand alone on its own. So it means that divers often wear wetsuits is an independent clause, and which are examples of basic diving equipment is the subordinate or dependent clause. We have four types of sentences: the complex sentences, simple sentences, compound complex sentences, and compound sentences. First, let's look at the simple sentences, a single independent clause. We have discussed the independent clause, a clause that can stand on its own and it conveys a complete sense. So it is known as a simple sentence. Then we have the complex sentences, an independent clause with one or more dependent clauses. So complex sentences have an independent clause with one or more than one dependent clauses. Then we have the compound sentences, two independent clauses. They are basically connected by a conjunction such as and or but and because. And then we have the compound complex sentences. This is a multiple independent clauses with one or more dependent clauses. So compound complex sentences are quite longer sentences. In these, uh, basically they are the mixture or the combination of the simple sentences and then the dependent clauses. Here we have an examples of the types of sentences with their examples. Simple, one independent clause, the dog barks. If you look at this sentence, it is conveying a complete sense on its own. Even if we do not add a dependent clause with it, still it conveys a complete sense. Then we have the compound sentence. Independent clauses separated by a semicolon or a comma and conjunction. The pirate captain lost the treasure map, but he still found the buried treasure. To read these two sentences without but, these two independent clauses are conveying the complete sense. Complex sentences, one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. Because the soup was too cold, I warmed it in the microwave. So here you can see that because the soup was too cold, then what? So this is a dependent clause. I warmed, you can substitute it with the soup. I warmed the soup in the microwave. This is an independent clause. And then compound complex sentence, two independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. Though Michael enjoys watching comedies, he rented the latest spy thriller and he enjoyed it very much. If you look at this sentence, though Michael enjoys watching comedies, he rented the latest spy thriller. He enjoyed it very much. He rented the latest spy thriller. He enjoyed it very much. These are the independent clauses. And though Michael enjoys watching comedies is a dependent clause. That's it for today. Your homework is to read the pages 10 to 11. An extract from a book is given there. So try to read it properly. And then you have to do activity 2.4, which is your homework. So I hope that you have understood the concepts given in highlighted in this lecture, and we will be further discussing in detail the concepts that are there in the further units. So stay tuned to the further lectures based on focus on comprehension. Today's lecture has formally ended. Allah Hafiz.